You don't expect betrayal to come with a smile. Not when you're 10 years old and still believe adults know better. Back then, I used to think my Uncle Calvin was just a little strange. He was the kind of man who always had a pocket full of mints, who called me princess, even when I wore mud-streaked jeans and had a scraped knee. He always lingered a second too long with a hug, always seemed to know when no one else was in the room. My parents, busy, tired, grateful for any help, thought the world of him. Calvin's harmless, my mother would say, when I mumbled excuses to not go with him to the park. He's just trying to be nice. But even as a child, I knew the difference between nice and wrong. I just didn't have the words yet. The secret games started during one of those Saturday afternoons. My parents were out. Calvin was watching me. He brought me a milkshake and a new jigsaw puzzle. I remember how carefully he locked the front door. "So nobody interrupts us," he smiled, like it was normal. And maybe that first time, I convinced myself it was. Kids don't know what boundaries are until someone breaks them. He never hurt me the way headlines describe. He wasn't violent. He wasn't loud. That's what made it worse. He was gentle, calculated, and every time I tried to pull away or say no, he made me feel like I'd broken some unspoken promise between us. "This is our little world," he'd whisper. "Our special thing." It went on for a year of whispered threats masked as affection, a year of learning how to lie to my parents without even thinking. I stopped inviting friends over. I stopped sleeping well. I started flinching when men at church bent down to say hello, but I stayed silent. Because he said no one would believe me. Because he said my parents would be heartbroken if they found out I'd ruined the family. Eventually, it ended. Not because I found the courage to tell, but because his attention drifted. He got married, moved out of state. Just like that, it stopped. And I told myself to be grateful, to forget, to let it go. I buried it so deep that sometimes I believed I had imagined it. Until a month ago. I was at my desk at the county library, where I work part-time, scanning a digitized list for a volunteer background check project. One of the registries was restricted, flagged for law enforcement only, but someone had uploaded a corrupted file into the wrong directory. There he was. Calvin C. Merritt. Registered. Convicted. 3 separate counts. It felt like the floor buckled under me. I don't remember if I cried. I do remember how cold the mouse felt in my hand as I clicked open his profile. There were other girls, more recent ones. One of them was 11. Suddenly, everything I thought I'd buried clawed its way back. My silence had been part of the problem. My silence had made me complicit. I looked at the screen, at the photo of a face I hadn't seen in over 20 years, and I knew I couldn't stay quiet anymore. For 3 nights after I saw Calvin's name, I didn't sleep. Not really. I stared at the ceiling fan until the blades blurred into a gray smear. I sat in the dark living room with a blanket around my shoulders, clutching my laptop like it might fight back if I closed it. I read and reread his file. Every line, every date. The charges went back less than 5 years. That meant he'd been doing this long after I convinced myself he was done. The little girl, her name had been redacted, was just 11. It was the same age I had been when Calvin suddenly stopped coming around. Her case was buried behind sealed court motions and legal red tape. But the timeline matched up with the brief years Calvin had returned to the state. It wasn't just one child. There were 3 listed on his registry profile. Only the most recent had pressed charges. The rest had insufficient evidence next to their claims. That phrase alone made my hands shake. At first, I wanted to call someone, the police, a lawyer, anyone. But what would I say? That I had stayed silent for over 2 decades? That I only came forward after seeing his face pop up on a misfiled database? The shame curled around my ribs like vines. It wasn't just fear of not being believed. It was the fear of being asked, "Why now? Why didn't you say something then?" I thought of my mother, now in a nursing home 2 towns over, drifting in and out of clarity. If she ever learned the truth, would it kill what was left of her? And my father, gone for over 15 years now, would he have believed me? Or would he have looked at me with that disappointed heaviness I feared more than anything? But none of that mattered anymore. This wasn't about me anymore. This was about the girl in the court documents, the ones who didn't get to forget, who were still living in that confused, trembling silence. I knew what that felt like. The way your body becomes foreign to you, how you start shrinking yourself in rooms because you're afraid of being noticed, the way you stop trusting hugs, laughter, smiles. On the fourth day, I opened a new document on my computer and began writing. Not a report, not a statement, just the truth, as plainly as I could bear to say it. I wrote about that first Saturday afternoon, about the puzzle, the milkshake, the locked door. I wrote about how my stomach would twist when he pulled into the driveway, how I used to hide behind the couch and hope he wouldn't see me. I wrote until the sun came up, my fingers aching and my face damp with tears I didn't remember shedding. And then I printed it. I didn't have a plan. Not yet. But I had a beginning. 2 days later, I made my way to the county courthouse, with my sealed envelope clutched to my chest. I wasn't ready to file it, but I needed to know the steps. I needed to look someone in the eye, someone official, and ask what it would take for this to matter, for someone to listen. The clerk behind the counter wore thick glasses and had tired eyes. Her badge read, Teresa. I cleared my throat and said, Hi. I need to report something from a long time ago. She didn't blink. She didn't wave me off. She just nodded slowly, reached for a small stack of forms and said, Let's start with this. And when you're ready, we can talk to someone in victim services. That night, I didn't sleep either. But it wasn't from fear. It was from something new. Resolve. The form was simple enough. Checkboxes, spaces for dates, names, details I had kept locked in a drawer at the back of my mind for over 2 decades. But filling them out made me feel like I was moving underwater. Everything slowed. Every question poked at a bruise I thought had faded. Where did the abuse take place? How often? Was anyone else aware? Number no one had known. Not really. I had told my friend Elise once back in high school when we were passing notes in algebra and pretending to care about finals. I remember the way her eyes changed when I whispered, It wasn't a game. He used to touch me. She didn't laugh, but she didn't ask for more either. She said, That's awful. And then we moved on. I didn't blame her. I wouldn't have known what to say either. At the bottom of the form, there was a box labeled Additional Information. I stared at it for minutes, then wrote, He told me it was a secret game. He said if I told anyone, I'd ruin the family. I paused, then added, I believed him. I handed the form back to Teresa and expected something. Maybe a reaction, maybe a judgment. But she just placed it inside a folder and said, Someone from victim services will contact you. You're not alone. That last part, you're not alone, hit harder than I expected. I walked back to my car, sat behind the wheel, and let myself cry without shame for the first time in years. 2 days later, a woman named Denise from Victim Services called. Her voice was warm but firm, the way a good teacher speaks to a frightened child. She asked if I'd be comfortable coming in for a formal interview and if I had any support system in place. I told her no. I had coworkers, I had neighbors. But this, no one else knew. She didn't push. She just said, We can take this slow. It's still your story. I agreed to meet her the following Monday. Over the weekend, I did something I hadn't done in over 10 years. I searched for Calvin online. He was living 3 counties over, still working in a hardware supply store. His registry photo looked recent, thinner, grayer, But the eyes were the same, cold, patient, like nothing in the world could surprise him anymore. I found a news clipping from 4 years ago, a small blurb in the local paper. Man pleads guilty in child endangerment case, receives probation. That was it. No mugshot, no big story. Just a whisper in a town that didn't want to hear more. I knew then, if I didn't speak louder than a whisper, he would do it again. If not to family, then to someone else's niece, someone else's daughter. Monday came. I sat across from Denise in a quiet room lined with file cabinets and a single tissue box. She didn't ask invasive questions. She let me talk. And when I finished, with my voice shaking and my hands clenched in my lap, she asked if I would be willing to give a recorded statement for the district attorney. That was the moment everything shifted. It wasn't just a story anymore. It was evidence. 3 days after the recording, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. I hesitated before answering. Some part of me had expected this silence, a waiting period where the system would process and shuffle things like it always did. But when I answered and heard the voice introduce herself, Assistant District Attorney Morgan Fields, my breath caught in my throat. She asked if I had a moment. I said yes, though my hands were trembling so badly I had to sit down on the kitchen floor to keep from falling. "We've reviewed your recorded statement," she said, calm but steady, "and I need you to know that it was compelling, courageous, and it may be the key to reopening what was, frankly, an under-investigated case." I wanted to feel something, pride, maybe, relief. But what came over me was panic. "What happens now?" I asked. "We're building a case file, officially. There are limits to what we can pursue, depending on the statute of limitations and prior adjudications," she said. "But your statement, in context with the other one from 4 years ago, creates a very serious pattern." My stomach twisted. The other one. She meant another girl, someone else who had spoken, someone else who hadn't been heard. Morgan asked if I'd be willing to meet in person. I agreed, barely remembering how the conversation ended. I hung up the phone and sat there on the cold tile, knees tucked up to my chest, heart beating like a drum inside my throat. Later that evening, I went for a walk to clear my head. It was dusk, the kind of blue light that softens edges and makes shadows longer. As I passed the small post office, I saw a car parked outside with a familiar dent in the back bumper. Calvin's. I froze. I couldn't see inside. I didn't want to. I turned around, walked quickly, then faster, until I was nearly jogging back to my apartment. My skin crawled the entire way. Maybe it was just coincidence. Maybe it wasn't. I called Denise, voice shaking, and told her what I saw. She listened, then said, "He might have been notified about the investigation. It's legal protocol, but it doesn't mean he can contact you. If he does, we'll escalate it." "Escalate?" I whispered. "We'll protect you." But the word protect didn't feel like a shield. It felt like a thread, thin, frayed, and vulnerable to snapping. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept replaying the image of that car, the dull red paint, the chipped side mirror, the sense that no matter how far I'd come, he could still find me. The next morning, I met with Morgan in her office. She didn't look like I expected. No suit, no stiff posture. She wore a loose sweater, hair tied up, and offered me tea instead of water. "You're doing something powerful," she said as she opened a folder filled with notes and photos I couldn't bear to look at. "But it's going to get harder before it gets easier." We talked for over an hour. She laid out the path ahead: subpoenas, interviews, the likelihood of a hearing. She explained that even if formal charges couldn't be filed for my case due to timing, my statement could still support prosecution if any new victims came forward. "Your voice might be the bridge someone else needs," she said. I nodded. I didn't cry this time. Before I left, she handed me a list of resources: legal, emotional, financial. At the bottom was a handwritten note: "You are not the shame. He is." The day I told my sister, I expected screaming, or crying, or at least disbelief. But she said nothing, not at first. We were sitting in the diner we used to visit with our mother when we were teenagers, back when the worst thing I thought could happen in life was a bad grade or a boy ignoring me. I picked that place intentionally. It felt neutral, familiar. It gave me a false sense of safety. A booth and a bottomless pot of coffee could only do so much. "I need to tell you something," I said. My voice came out thinner than I'd meant it to. She looked up from her tea, one eyebrow raised. I told her. I said the words out loud. "Uncle Calvin, what he did to me when I was little. It wasn't just odd. It wasn't innocent. I've filed a statement. The DA's office is investigating." She stared at me as though I'd grown a second head. Then she laughed. Not a cruel laugh, but the kind people give when they don't want to believe what they're hearing. "You're serious?" she said, blinking fast. "You think he—" "I don't think. I know." She leaned back, lips pressed tight. I watched as the color drained from her face. A full minute passed before she spoke again. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "I always thought something was off. I just— I didn't want to be the one who said it." I wanted to be angry that she hadn't spoken sooner, but I knew how deep that silence could bury itself. I knew because I had lived inside it. She asked if she could do anything. I didn't have an answer. I told her I'd let her know. That night, I typed up my story. The whole thing, not just the legal version, not just the I was 10 version. I wrote about the way Calvin used to bring me butterscotch candy before the games. I wrote about the panic I felt when I saw his name on that list. I wrote about the awful, hollow guilt I carried for decades, how I let myself believe I was to blame for not stopping him. When I was done, I emailed the draft to Morgan. The next day, she called. "This is powerful," she said. "Have you considered publishing it?" I hadn't. Not really. But something in her voice told me that she had a reason for asking. "I think it might help others," she said gently. "It could even help us, if more victims come forward. Going public." The words made my blood run cold. "I don't want to be famous," I said. "I just want him to stop." Morgan was quiet for a beat. Sometimes the two aren't separate. That evening, I got another call. An unknown number again. This time, I didn't answer. The voicemail came 5 minutes later. A man's voice. Low, calm. "You think dragging my name through the mud will make you feel better? Be careful what you dig up. Some graves aren't as deep as you think." I dropped the phone. I played the message for Morgan. She filed it as evidence and confirmed it came from a prepaid burner. "He's watching you," she said. "But it also means he's scared." Her words should have comforted me. Instead, they confirmed something I'd already felt deep in my chest. This wasn't just about me anymore. Calvin wasn't going to let this go quietly. And if he had the gall to call me, knowing the DA was building a case, what else might he try? I looked at my daughter sleeping on the couch, still in her school uniform. Her shoes half kicked off. The same age I'd been when the games began. Number I wouldn't be silent anymore. I thought telling the truth once, into a recorder, across a desk, behind closed doors, would be enough. But the moment I watched Calvin's name disappear from the headlines, replaced by newer crimes and fresher tragedies, I felt it like a second betrayal. He was still out there, living, moving, smiling in public spaces. If there was one thing I learned through those endless nights awake, it was this: predators survive in silence. They thrive in polite secrecy, in our willingness to say, "It's not our business," and look away. So I wrote the piece, not for a blog, Not for a newspaper. For me. For any woman out there sitting in her kitchen, clutching her own version of my fear, convinced she's the only one. It took weeks, drafts I deleted before they were even done. Every time I typed, "My uncle molested me when I was 10, I froze. My hands shook. The language felt like a weapon and a wound. But eventually, the truth hardened on the page. I didn't name him at first. I just described the kind of man who asks a child to keep secrets, who tells her she's special, then threatens her when she resists. I wrote about the confusion, the shame, the loneliness, and how those feelings don't vanish when you grow up. They just grow deeper roots. Denise read it first, then Morgan, and finally, my sister Carolyn. She sat across from me, coffee untouched between her hands, eyes fixed on every word. By the time she looked up, tears had made her makeup blotchy. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. "We were kids," I said. "You wouldn't have believed me. I didn't believe me." She didn't say anything after that, just reached over and squeezed my hand. That was all I needed. When I finally clicked publish on the article, hosted anonymously but traceable to me if you knew where to look, I expected backlash. Or worse, silence. Instead, within 24 hours, there were over 500 shares. Then comments, then emails. One message, sent privately, nearly brought me to my knees. "He did the same to me. I never told anyone, until now." Calvin must have seen it too, because 2 nights later, someone broke the lock on my back gate. Nothing was taken, but muddy footprints led up to my kitchen window. I didn't call the police. I called Morgan. By morning, I had an emergency contact detail, a direct line to a precinct officer, and a small, discreet GPS tracker pressed into my palm like a lifeline. I wasn't just a witness anymore. I was a target. But I wasn't going to disappear. Not this time. It didn't take long for the calls to start. Not the kind that offered support or solidarity. Those came too, and I clung to them like breath in deep water. But the ones that came late at night, silent on the other end. Or worse, whispering things no stranger should know. The color of my curtains. The name of my childhood cat. Morgan had warned me that going public meant losing control over the narrative, for a while. "They'll come after you because they have nothing else," she said. "But that means they're scared, and that means you've already won more than you know." Winning didn't feel like this. At the DA's recommendation, I changed my phone number and added a second lock to the front door. Caroline insisted I stay with her and her husband for a few days, especially after someone left a manila envelope under my windshield wiper. Inside was a single photo. Me at 11 years old, playing at the lake near our grandparents' cabin. Calvin was reminding me where the memories began. Still, Morgan kept building the case. Through a combination of the registry entries, my recorded statement, and several other leads that came from women emboldened by my article, the DA's office was preparing for a grand jury hearing. Not. But Calvin didn't hire just any attorney. He brought in someone whose reputation was slicker than oil and twice as toxic. Marshall Kincaid, a man known for dismantling credibility with a smirk and a stack of character affidavits. Within a week, there were whispers online that I had made everything up, that I was unstable, that I'd been obsessed with Calvin as a child and had acted out. Morgan was furious. "It's textbook," she told me. "They tear the victim down until there's nothing left. But we're not letting that happen. Not this time." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But I knew how stories shifted, especially when told by someone like Calvin, who wore trust like a second skin. Caroline, for her part, never wavered. When one of Calvin's old coworkers called her house to ask what kind of family feud this really was, she hung up and changed her number. "If he wants to drag us into court, then fine," she said. "Let's make sure the whole room hears what he really is." Even Denise, steady, gentle Denise, cracked when she saw the photograph from the lake. "He's escalating," she said quietly. "That wasn't a message to scare you. That was a warning. I remember everything, and I'll use it." Despite it all, I kept showing up. To Morgan's office, to the precinct for check-ins, to late-night phone calls with survivors who whispered, "Me too," into the dark. And when I finally walked into the room where the grand jury sat, 12 strangers staring back at me, waiting to hear whether there was enough evidence to indict a man my family once called the fun uncle, I stood tall. "I am not the only one," I said, my voice steady, "but I'll be the one who speaks." The days following the grand jury testimony passed in a strange kind of fog, one where time stretched and crumpled unpredictably. Every phone call startled me. Every knock on the door tightened my throat. I kept telling myself I had done the hardest part, that speaking the truth aloud in that room full of strangers was the summit. But in truth, it was just the climb. The fall, I knew, could still come. Morgan called 3 days later. "They're moving forward," she said, her voice calm but laced with tension. "Calvin's being indicted on 3 counts, 2 felony charges, 1 misdemeanor." I sat on my kitchen floor, with the phone still pressed to my ear long after she'd hung up. The silence afterward was almost as loud as the news. He was finally being brought into court. There would be charges, a trial, witnesses. No more hiding. But with the indictment came the firestorm. Marshal Kincaid immediately filed motions to suppress prior registry entries, calling them prejudicial. He held a press conference outside the courthouse, painting Calvin as a beloved community figure, unfairly targeted by family drama and opportunistic revisionism. I watched it from my sister's living room, my stomach in knots as he waved a stack of printed emails, claiming they were from me. Confusing, emotionally unstable messages from years ago that paint a very different picture of their relationship. I hadn't written those emails. But that was the thing about doubt. It didn't need to be proven to stick. It just had to be planted. Morgan warned me that things would get worse before they got better. "They'll try to exhaust you," she said. "The goal isn't to win the truth. It's to make you walk away from it." But I didn't. I couldn't. The day Calvin was arraigned, I sat in the back of the courtroom. He didn't look at me when he walked in, but I saw the tension in his jaw, the forced calm. His wife sat 2 rows ahead, her hand gripping the edge of the pew so tightly her knuckles had gone white. I remembered her birthday cakes and garden parties and the way she used to hum while cleaning. I wondered if she ever suspected, or if she simply refused to. The hearing was brief. Calvin pled not guilty. Kincaid requested a gag order, citing undue media interference. The judge agreed, which meant that from now on, I couldn't speak publicly. I couldn't respond to the accusations, the growing online speculation, the emails from reporters asking if I had fabricated the trauma. And somehow, the silence this time felt worse than when I was 10. Because now I knew better. Now I had a voice, and they were asking me to put it away again. Denise called that night. She didn't offer platitudes. She just asked what I needed. "Tell me this isn't for nothing," I whispered. "It's not," she said. "You just haven't seen the end of the story yet." Trial prep began like a low hum in the background of my life, constant, uneasy, and impossible to ignore. Morgan scheduled meetings weekly, sometimes twice, walking me through what to expect. She rehearsed my testimony, reminded me of my rights, and warned me that I'd be questioned like I was the one on trial. "You've got truth," she said quietly during one of our prep sessions. "But truth doesn't always win. It needs stamina. It needs you to hold the line." The line was wearing thin. Calvin's team filed a motion to dismiss, claiming lack of credible evidence, despite the growing number of victims now cooperating with the DA's office. Morgan said it was a common tactic. Still, it hit like a gut punch. I sat with Denise that night, watching the rain hit the windows in her office. I told her how tired I was, how the nightmares had returned, and how I sometimes second-guessed everything, even though I knew I shouldn't. "It's trauma logic," she said gently. "It's what happens when someone gaslights you long enough to make you question your memory, your instincts, your worth. And now, the world is echoing that same message back to you. But that doesn't make it true." I nodded, but I didn't speak. I was afraid that if I opened my mouth, all that would come out was a scream. One night, I found a note taped to my car windshield. It wasn't signed, but I knew. The handwriting was familiar. "You're not the only one with secrets," it said. "Keep pushing, and I'll tell mine." I didn't know what he meant, but it worked. I barely slept. When I told Morgan, she went pale. "We'll increase surveillance. Stay with your sister. Don't go anywhere alone." That same week, Calvin's wife filed for separation. Quietly, without a press release. Morgan said it wouldn't help or hurt our case, but I disagreed. I remembered her silence over the years, the way she looked through me at holidays. Maybe now she was seeing something she couldn't ignore. The final pretrial hearing came faster than I was ready for. I watched Calvin walk in with that same smug restraint, the mask of a man who had spent his whole life getting away with everything. Kincaid did most of the talking, but Calvin never looked at me. Not once. Morgan argued with fire. She laid out the timeline, the patterns, the similarities in victim accounts. She never once said my name, but I felt it in every word. As the judge set the trial date, I felt a chill pass through me. Not fear, not entirely. It was the feeling you get when you realize the real fight hasn't even started yet. The day of the trial, the courthouse felt colder than usual, like the air itself was bracing for what it was about to hold. I sat at the edge of the bench outside the courtroom with Denise on one side, Morgan on the other. Neither said much, and neither needed to. We'd spent weeks preparing, line by line, memory by memory. But no amount of rehearsal could make what I had to say easy. Inside, Calvin was already seated with Marshal Kincaid at his side. He looked thinner, older, but his eyes, those hadn't changed. They still held that gleam, the kind that makes you question your own reflection. When the judge called my name, I stood. My knees threatened to betray me, but I walked anyway. Past the spectators, past Calvin, up to the witness stand. The oath felt heavier than I expected, not because I didn't mean it, but because I knew the weight of every word that would follow. Morgan started gently. "Do you recall the first time your uncle began what you later understood to be inappropriate contact?" I did. And I said so, in full. I walked them through the basement games, the secrets, the way he spoke in riddles only a child would think meant love. The courtroom was silent, not even a cough. Then came the defense. Kincaid stood slowly, like a man preparing for theater. "Ms. Foster," he said, "you waited over 20 years. Why now?" I looked straight at him. "Because I saw his name. Because I saw what silence had allowed him to become. And because I won't let another girl go through what I did." He tried to shake me, questioned my memory, implied confusion, even brought up my college breakdown. But each time, I answered clearly. When it was over, I stepped down. My legs were weak, but I stayed upright. Later that afternoon, Morgan found me in the hallway. "The jury's still deliberating," she said. "But no matter the verdict, you did it. You told the truth, and you weren't alone." She was right. The courtroom had been filled with more than just law. It held the weight of every woman who had emailed me, every name Calvin had tried to erase. 3 days later, the verdict came. Guilty on 4 counts. Not everything, not the full picture, but enough. Outside the courthouse, I stood in the sun. Denise hugged me. My sister cried. I didn't, not yet. That night, I opened the journal I'd kept hidden for years. On the first blank page, I wrote one line: "He is no longer a secret."